Military aviation became of age during World War I, when airships and early aircraft were principally used for reconnaissance. 4 Australian Flying Corps squadrons were part of the Australian Imperial Force and were attached to the larger British Royal Flying Corps formations. During World War I, 800 officers and 2,840 men served in the Australian Flying Corps, seeing action in Palestine and in France, where 175 lost their lives. During the 1920s, the AFC was replaced by the Australian Air Corps, which in turn became the Royal Australian Air Force on the 31st of March 1921.
There wasn't many facilities here. There was only the one milk bar which sold everything, or Mrs. Fry's where the Shell is now. And I used to walk down on a Sunday, we had a Sunday roast to get a bottle of cream. All down Milburn Road, all down there was full of market gardens. And there was market gardens up on Calder Rise on the left and right side. That's where my mum used to live. And they had an orchard full of apples. Where the vet is now, on that, Andersons were on the right and Mum was on the left. And that was all orchards and fruit trees and everything, yeah. It was called the Willows in those days. That was the name of the house. And then all of a sudden they moved down here to the old house, and the orchards went and the houses started to build. And my uncle used to, because there was no houses, he used to go rabbiting up there, up as far as Taylor's Lakes and bring the rabbits home. And I remember one day he brought one home with mixo, and I've never ate rabbit from that day to this. And then all the hill up here, behind us, that was full of snakes. Mr. Hazelgrave used to go up and get all these snakes and hang them. It was exciting to go and see how many snakes he caught, because he'd put them up on a piece of wood. You know, people say that now, you live near the snake pit. So you didn't go up there?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because there was this one tree and there was a pit there. And that's where they used to come to, evidently. That was the story, yes. Yeah. And to get your shopping, we used to have to go to Moonee Ponds to get, because there was no supermarket, nothing big like it is today. Yeah, we always had the Oval, and that was great for the people and the football, and that was a great get-together on a Saturday, the Keilor football. And anything Mum could cook in the wood oven. It was always in the wood oven, and warm the water up, and yeah. She cooked very basic, not like they have nowadays, they didn't. And we used to have the baker come in the cart, and I used to go and get the bread out, and as I was coming in, I'd eat the end where the crust was. Oh, it was beautiful. And I used to get in trouble. But that's how we got our bread, and our milk, of course, got delivered. Yeah, and that was so exciting to see the horse and the truck come to get the bread, and the smell was beautiful. Yeah. Knowing everybody, and everybody was friendly, and everybody knew everybody, and you all got on, and not like these days, you know, some of the neighbours don't even know. Whereas everybody knew everybody, and you got on. And everyone, if there was a crisis, everyone was there to help you. Yeah, that's the unique. Now, because it's so big, people don't do those things anymore. It is still a country town for the older people. And people, I have found that people like me they've gone away and they've come back. And they like to bring their kids up in Keilor.
He apparently was overseas till about 1917, where he suffered an injury to his foot or his ankle. And when he came back, he was awarded a very small pension, which I think, when the Depression came, I think they took off him. He then applied for and was given a soldier settlement block down near the railway line, and he lived there with his brother Bill until he died in 1947. The two of them apparently used to drive their horse and cart up with, loaded up with vegetables, and which they sold around the Essendon shops, and then they would retire to the hotel, which was a Harrick custom in those days only, and that one of my cousins who's still alive said she remembers when she was a little girl meeting him outside the hotel, and he'd give her a 2-shilling piece. And apparently he was a very likeable man, but he and his brother never married, and unfortunately he died before I had a chance to meet him.
Australia only had one explosives factory, a private explosives factory, which was at Deer Park, and one government explosives factory, which was at Maribyrnong. So within the whole of the country, it was within this region, not very far from Keilor, that there were 2 explosives factories. One had only just started, the government factory down the river at Maribyrnong, and one had started quite a few years before in the 1870s, that was making explosives for, particularly for quarrying. Also down the river was an ammunition factory, a private ammunition factory initially, and during the war there were 1,000 girls working there making ammunition. It was a fairly dangerous industry, obviously, with very strict safety regulations. A lot of girls worked in the industry, particularly at Footscray. They had to wear special clothing, and they had to obey certain regulations, not wear rings or hairpins, or wear special shoes and clothing. And there were terrible accidents just before the war, one in 1897 when 3 or 4 girls were blown up in one incident in Footscray by the river, the Maribyrnong River. So that's a part of the story of the munitions industry, which we're not always aware of, that it was a dangerous industry and that quite a few young women were working in it. Yes, the sheep were the lawnmowers, and it was again part of the safety, because if you had a lawnmower it might set off a spark, whereas sheep were more stable and reliable, and it was a very peaceful scene on the whole, although it was such a dangerous industry. And it was partly because Keilor and the surrounding area were empty paddocks, apart from sheep and cattle and horses. It was ideal for a dangerous industry such as either the explosives factory industry or the production of ammunition. They tended to, the women who were working in these industries, explosives and ammunition, often worked in little huts, 4 at a time, so with a big, perhaps a wooden hut, with a wall of sandbags or concrete around them. And the idea of this system was that if one shed blew up, then only one group of people would be injured and the explosion wouldn't spread to the rest of the factory. And this happened more than once. And if you look at a map of the area, you'll see all these little dots which stand for these little sheds and the mounds around each shed, both at the explosives factory in Maribyrnong and at Footscray and also Deer Park.
There were few active roles open to Australian women during World War I. Women in Australia helped the war effort through charitable work such as fundraising, knitting or sending food to the troops. When war broke out, some Australian women travelled overseas at their own expense to help the wounded, while others already overseas enlisted as nurses in the British hospitals or in the British Army's nursing service. Others worked as drivers overseas. The British War Office requested that Australia raise medical units for overseas service. As Australia had few male nurses, more women were trained as nurses to fill the need for military nursing orderlies, increasing the number of female nurses. Hospitals were set up in Australia to treat the wounded who had been sent home to recover. Nursing provided a major opportunity for Australian women to participate actively in the war. Around 3,000 Australian nurses served as part of the Australian Army nursing service in places as diverse as Egypt, England, France, Gallipoli, Italy, Burma, Salonika and India. Many worked in British hospitals or in the British Army nursing units and later with Australian units, as well as hospital ships and in the Australian hospitals for the wounded. Overseas, it was not practical for Australian nurses to treat only Australians. They treated and nursed the wounded and of many nations. Australian nurses proved to be energetic, hard-working and resilient in very difficult circumstances. Challenges they faced included poor facilities, lack of staff, disease, harsh climate and, of course, large numbers of wounded and traumatised patients. Language difficulties with some patients were another problem they had to overcome.
We think it's so important that even that people maintain their records of their family history, and so that they can share it with others, because there's the danger that when it gets passed on, that the next part of your family may not see the importance of it, and then they'll get, they might just demolish it. And all these little elements are all part of Australia's history, and that's what we see we have a job to do.